I always thought Jesus taught unconditional love. He does, but love isn't exactly what you think it is. The concept taught is close, but it's been subtly twisted to keep Christians from being effective by those in power. Agape is translated as love, but it's not that simple. Agape is the love God had for his creation, and the love we have for the rest of creation because we love God. It's thankfulness and desire to see God's plans come to fruition. So if you desire God's plans to manifest, would you let an evildoer stomp all over you? No, that's failing to be loving. Besides, most evil people want things that will hurt them in the long run. It is loving to deny them what is bad for them. Unconditional love is true, but being loving isn't being a doormat. Most of what Paul says about love is properly rendered, except for love is kind, which is often misconstrued. Better translation, and what I believe Paul was conveying, would be love helps others, because it isn't necessarily kind or gentle, it's often tough love. While I'm noting false renderings of the Greek to keep people down, I'm going to tackle blessed are the meek. The word translated as meek is... I'm too lazy to go look up what that is in Greek. Strong's Concordance, 4,239 notes. Biblical meekness is not weakness, but whether referring to exercising God's strength under his control. Thus, everyone's reading that one wrong as well. In English, because it's about controlled power, would be blessed are those who use their gifts for the will of God, for they will inherit the earth. Of course, it takes a lot to render that in English, but I think it's better than the common misconception. There's no shortage of heresies these days. If you want to adopt some blasphemous, perverted, funhouse, mirror reflection of Christianity, you'll find a variable buffet of options. You can sift through all the variants and build your own little pet version of the faith. It's a little ice cream social Christianity. Make your own Sunday. Or Sunday, as it were. And of all the heretical choices, probably the most common, and possibly the most damaging, is what I've come to call the nice doctrine. Propagators of the nice doctrine can be seen and heard from any time any Christian takes a bold stance on a cultural issue, or uses harsh language of any kind, or condemns any sinful act, or fights against evil with any force or conviction at all. As soon as he or she stands and says, "This is wrong, and I will not compromise," the heretics swoop in with their trusty mantras. They insist Jesus was a nice man, that he would never have done anything to upset people. They say he came down from heaven to preach tolerance and acceptance, and he wouldn't have used words that might have led to hurt feelings. They confidently sermonize about a meek and mild Messiah who was born into this earthly realm on a mission to spark a constructive dialogue. The believers in the nice Jesus are usually ignorant of Scripture, but they do know he was friends with prostitutes and once said something about how we shouldn't get too ticked off about stuff. In their minds, he's essentially a supernatural Chishmarin. I've read comments under my previous post about gay right militants, and you'll see this history illustrated. That post prompted an especially noteworthy email from someone concerned that I am not being Christ-like because I call people names. He said in part, "You aren't spreading Christianity when you talk like that. The whole message of Jesus is that we should be nice to people because we want them to be nice to us. That's how we can all be happy. Period. It's that simple. Be nice to me, I'll be nice to you, we'll all be happy. This is the whole message of Christianity? Really? Jesus Christ preached a truth no deeper or more complex than a slogan on a poster in a kindergarten classroom? Really?" A provocative claim, to say the least. I decided to investigate the matter, and sure enough, I found this excerpt from the Sermon on the Mount. "We're best friends like friends should be, with a great big hug and a kiss from me to you. Won't you say you love me too?" Actually, wait, sorry. That's from the original Barney theme song. God help us. We've turned the Son of God into a purple dinosaur puppet. There's no way to be certain, but most of these theologians believe that, despite popular perception, Christ looked nothing like this. I don't recognize this Jesus, this moderate, this pacifist, this nice guy. He's not the Jesus I read about in the Bible. I read of a strong, manly, stern, and bold Savior. Compassionate? Yes. Forgiving? Of course. Loving? Always loving. But not particularly nice. He condemned, he denounced, he caused trouble. He disrupted the established order. On one occasion, or at least one recorded occasion, he used violence. This Jesus saw the money changers in the temple, and how did he respond? He wasn't polite about it. I'd say he's downright intolerant. He fashioned a whip, this is what the lawyers would call premeditation, and physically drove the merchants away. He turned over the tables and shouted. He caused a scene. Assault with a deadly weapon, vandalism, disturbing the peace, worse still, intolerance. And 2 words, not nice. Not nice at all. Can you imagine how some moderate, pious, nice Christians of today would react to that spectacle in the temple? Can you envision the proponents of the nice doctrine, with their waggling fingers and the passive-aggressive sighs? I'm sure they'd send Jesus a patronizing email, perhaps leave a disappointing comment under the news article about the incident, reminding Jesus that Jesus would never do what Jesus just did. Personally, I've studied the New Testament and found not a single instance of Christ calling for dialogue with evil or seeking the middle ground on an issue. I see an absolutist, unafraid of confrontation. I see a man who did not waver or give credence to the other side. I see someone who never once avoided a dispute by saying he'll just agree to disagree. I see a Christ who calls the scribes and the Pharisees snakes and vipers. He labels them murderers and blind guides, ridicules them publicly. He undermines their authority, he insults them, he castigates them. He's not very nice to them. Jesus rebukes and condemns them. In Matthew 18, he utilizes morbid and violent imagery, saying that it'd be better to drown in the sea with a stone around your neck than to harm a child. Had our modern politicians been around 2,000 years ago, I'm sure they'd go on cable news shows and shake their heads and insist there's no place for that kind of language. No place for the language of God. Jesus deliberately did and said things that he knew would upset people. He stirred up division and controversy. He provoked. He didn't have to break from established customs, but he did. He didn't have to heal that man's hand on the Sabbath, knowing how it would disturb the others and cause them immense irritation. But he did, and he did so with anger. He could have gone with the flow a little bit. He could have chilled out and let bygones be bygones, but he didn't. He could have been diplomatic, but he wasn't. He could have told everyone to relax, but instead, he made them uncomfortable. He could have put them at ease, but he chose to put them on edge. He convinced the mob not to throw stones at the adulterer, and you'll notice that he then turned to her and told her to stop sinning. Indeed, never once did he encounter sin and corruption and say, "Hey, do your thing, homies. Just have fun. YOLO." The followers of the nice doctrine love to quote the throw the first stone verse, and for good reason. It's a beautiful and compelling story, but you rarely hear mention of the exchange that occurs a few sentences later in that very same chapter. In John 8:44, Jesus rebukes unbelieving Jews and calls them sons of the devil. Wow, that wasn't very nice, Jesus. Didn't anyone ever tell you that you can catch more flies with honey, Jesus? Of course, you catch even more flies with the amount of garbage, so maybe catching flies isn't the point. While we're often reminded that Jesus said, "Live by the sword, die by the sword," we seem to ignore his other sword references. like when he told his disciples to sell their cloaks and buy a sword, or when he said he didn't come to bring peace, but a sword. Now it's true that he is God and we are not. Jesus can say whatever he wants to say, but we're called to be like Christ, which begs the question, what is Christ like? Well, he is, among other things, uncompromising. He is intolerant of evil. He is disruptive. He's sometimes harsh. He's sometimes impolite. He's sometimes angry. He is always loving. Christ was not and is not some cosmic guidance counselor. He is not mankind's best friend, nor did he call us to be. He made dogs for that role. Our destiny is more substantial, and our path is far more challenging and dangerous. And nice? Where does nice factor into this? Nice, affable, peachy, swell. Nice has nothing to do with Christianity. I've got nothing against nice. Nice is nice. But even serial killers can be nice to people. They're generally exceptionally affable, except when they're murdering. That means they're nice to, like, 97 or 98% of everybody they meet. I guess they follow Christ almost all the time, right? And tolerance? Tolerance is easy. Any coward can learn to tolerate something. Tolerance is inaction. Intolerance is action. We're accused to refuse to tolerate evil. We're called to get angry at it and to actively work to destroy it. Who would have guessed it? Anger is far more godly than tolerance ever could be. Obviously, I'm not saying anger is automatically or even usually justified. Christ exhibited righteous anger. Righteous anger is the sort of anger that naturally fills our soul when we confront the depths of depravity and sin. Is it wrong to seethe with rage because someone cut us off in traffic or gossips about us behind our back? But it's also wrong to feel no anger when babies are murdered and the institution of the family is undermined and attacked. Anger is good when it's directed at things that offend not us, but God. Just as Christ's intolerance, just like the intolerance we're commanded to have, stems from a desire to save souls and defend truth. Even when we have righteous anger, we do not have carte blanche to act on it any way as we please. But according to the Bible, there are sometimes to use strong languages, there are sometimes to cause a scene, there are sometimes to hurt people's feelings, and there are sometimes when we might need to use physical force. Jesus told us to turn the other cheek when we were personally attacked. He never told us to turn our backs entirely and let lies spread and evil grow. So enough with the niceties. Christians of this country sound too similar to the Golden Girls song, and not enough like the battle hymn of the Republic. There's too much "thank you for being a friend," and not enough lightning from his terrible swift sword. We're all hugging and singing Kumbaya when we should be marching and shouting hallelujah. We're nice Christians with our nice Jesus, and we're trampled on without protest. Enough already. I think it's time that Christianity regained its fighting spirit, the spirit of Christ. I think it's time we ask that question, what would Jesus do? And I think it's time we answer it truthfully. Jesus would flip tables and yell. Maybe we ought to follow suit.
Seen the glory of the